We're getting close to it. And then I should see you all back here again. You're probably hearing my voice. I can't see you, but
Okay.
when it comes back, I probably will. Oh, yay, there we are. Good, good, good. So we're being live streamed. Greetings, greetings, spring migration greetings to everyone. I'm Kim N. I am the president of Dunes-Calumet Audubon Society, and I am so happy that all of you have joined us. For those of you who just started joining us, we were on about 15 minutes earlier, just talking about the birds that we have seen, screech owls and orioles, no hummingbirds yet, but hopefully you will be seeing some good things in your area too. I'm going to share a screen with you that gives you some reminders about what's coming up. Um,
So, yeah, in a minute.
so let's see. Okay. I never remember how to get this little part off. So there we go. So this is the first weekend of the month, and in May and also in June, we have State Park, Indiana Dunes State Park. We have a morning hike there. So it'll be this Saturday, May 6th, and then again coming up on June 3rd. That's at the state park, and I believe Dan Baraball will meet you at the Wilson Shelter. There is an entry fee, and go on Eventbrite and let us know that you're coming. Sunday is going to be the walk with at the national park. Julie Bonema, our field trip coordinator, will be meeting folks at the visitor center. Registration is not required for that one, but you do need a national park pass. We also have a very special evening program coming up this month, again with Dan Baraball at the state park, and it's going to be looking for our woodcocks. So very exciting. Look at that bird. Be fun to see. We also have some volunteer opportunities, including our shorebird monitoring. Tomorrow morning, we will be at Miller Beach at the Lake Street parking area from 9 to 11 looking for shorebirds. We have bluebird monitoring over at Coffee Creek Watershed, helping out with the bluebird boxes there and also purple martins. And then we have one of our next fundraisers is our native plant sale, which will be part of the Indiana Dunes Birding Festival, the Migration Marketplace, which is on outside on the grounds right there at the visitor center. If you can help out with some of our selling times, we'd really love to have you. It's very easy to do, and you'll even get a free plant. So email me if you have any questions on that. Climate Watch. Oh, I said that was one of two fundraisers, and it's not on here, but we actually have our second fundraiser, which is our Birdathon, which also comes up in May. And we have a team, including myself, will be going out to see how many species we can find in less than 24 hours. So we'll be going throughout the Dune area, Lake and Porter County. I think last year we got, well, don't count. I better not say a number because I'll probably be wrong. But there's a way that you can help support that, and that fundraising information will be coming out to you in an email very, very soon. So Climate Watch surveys are coming up. If you like to look at birds and count them, you can help out with the Climate Watch. We have two routes that are still looking for a participant. And some of you who are on today are part of our Climate Watch program. And that is where you go a certain route, you get out at each stop, you look and listen for about 5 minutes. We're looking for white-breasted nuthatch and eastern bluebird. So we can get you trained in that too. So that is all of my information. So again, we're looking for some helpers at the native plant sale and also to help sponsor our fundraiser for the Birdathon. So we're in the middle of spring migration. Those little colorful birds, I think the yellow ones are coming first. It seems like those are the ones that we've seen so far. But we have our resident expert to help us go through the identification and where we might see these colorful warblers as they come through. So I think this is a great opportunity to practice again and get ready for that spring migration that's coming up next week. So I'm very pleased to have Michael Topp joining us, and he will have a nice slide presentation of showing us different birds that we hope to see. So whenever you are ready, Michael, to share your screen, we'd love to see it.
Can I do it now?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
So we ask everybody to go ahead and mute themselves, and we'll have questions at the end, or you could type them in the chat. Or if you're following on Facebook, just go ahead and type them in. We will monitor them and be sure to ask Michael at the end. So.
Hey, Patty.
So wood warblers. Okay, it looks really good. I see 3 pictures. I see one with a yellow head. I see with a black bib and some black striping. I see one with a blue head, a white chin,
Okay.
and I can't see the last one because all your pictures are there. But there's Michael. Oh, and he's bringing reinforcements.
Did you share?
Yeah.
You did
Yep,
that.
he's. Oh, that last bird has like a yellow head, some brown on its side. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. I did need some reinforcements, but now we're good.
Okay.
So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for this month's Dunes-Calumet Audubon Society's monthly presentation. The subject tonight is going to be wood warblers. This evening, I'll be giving a few ID tips and a few natural history facts that hopefully make these birds more interesting. Just a couple things I want to mention before I get started. Tonight, we're mostly going to be looking at the spring male birds. They're just more colorful. I wish I had time to show the female birds, but we just don't have time for that. So also, all these pictures are mine except one. I started photographing birds about 20 years ago. So pretty much all the pictures you're going to see tonight are going to be my own, which is good because I can tell you kind of where I took them to give you an idea where you might want to go. That being said, even though I can't show the female warblers, at the very end of the program, I'm going to give you my Smug Mug site. It has quite a few pictures on there, all of them taken from Indiana. I think it's like over 370 species that I've taken. You can go and look at all the different plumages. You know, if you like ducks or finches or whatever, it's probably going to be on there. So you just click on the thumbnails and there'll be like multiple pictures of those birds. Also, I'll give you a few spots to go see some of these birds. By no means is it the only place you can see them. In fact, maybe you have your own special spots. But I've probably been birding in the Calumet area for it's over 40 years now. So I kind of know some of the better spots that you can go to look for some of the birds. We're talking about mostly resident birds. In migration, you could get any bird anywhere. So you get some really good birds even in your own backyard. And one thing I wanted to mention before we get started is the many different habitats that we have here in the Dunes-Calumet area. The conifer forest, the eastern deciduous forests, mixed forests, swamps, marshes, woodlands, prairies. And so because of the special area that we have some of the warblers that either are at their northern limits, their southern limits, or their western limits of their breeding range here. So we get a lot of species that breed here, probably close to 20, even though some of them are quite rare. So tonight we're going to look at about 35 species of warblers that regularly come through, plus one, and I'll explain that one later on. So with that, let's get started on these colorful birds. So the first one we want to look at is the blue-winged warbler. Blue wings have a black line through their eye, 2 white wing bars, and face and underparts are yellowish, but the best field mark is that black, like a stripe between its eye and its bill, and also the blue wings. I'm also going to give you the peaks and the of the spring and fall migrations. Now, summer birds are here all summer, but they also have peaks too, because the birds that are migrating through. So this is the highest density of birds that you'll get. So for instance, the blue-winged warbler, they peak out around May 12th, and in the fall, they peak out around August 30th. These birds are becoming less common, mostly because they like scrubby habitat. And so with habitat destruction, they're becoming less populous. But they have extended their range north at the expense of the next bird that we're going to talk about. So usually I can find a few blue wings nesting in the state park, usually down by Trail 2, kind of the wet areas down there is where they usually are. Again, they're decreasing, so they're just becoming harder and harder to find. And another way to tell birds is by learning their calls. Roger Torpedo once said that he does 80% of his spring birding by listening for bird calls. And I kind of agree with him on that. So if you can kind of learn, you don't need to learn them all, but if you just learn some of them, like this one has a very kind of a buzzy bee buzz call. It's pretty, it almost sounds like an insect. So this is the blue-winged, and we're going to look at the next one. Oh, there's another picture of the blue-winged. You can see the dark stripe and the blue on the wings. Now, I actually took this over by the Highland Rookery, which is, I live in Highland, so I'm back there, used to be back there quite a bit. Next bird we're going to look at is the golden winged. It's a male golden wing right there. The golden wing is the only warbler with a combination of a yellow wing patch and a black throat. Its peaks are May 17th and September 4th. It likes scrubby habitats, but its population is declining. And it's actually retracting north. I used to get those on Trail 2, where Trail 10 and 2 used to be back in the 1980s. There'd always be a few pairs back there. But unfortunately, for different circumstances, maybe partially global warming, the blue wings would come back and take the better sites to nest, and also habitat destruction. So talking with some of my friends that kind of live over by South Bend, we basically feel that this bird is now extirpated from Indiana. So it doesn't nest here anymore. So the range has kind of gone up into Michigan now. So it's kind of sad to know that the bird that used to nest here doesn't really nest here anymore. There's a female. You can, instead of the black throat, it kind of has more of a grayish throat. So they like the scrubby habitats. Probably exported from Indiana. And again, it also has kind of a buzzy call. Blue wings and gold wings readily hybridize. They probably hybridize more than all the other birds species that I know of. In fact, they did it so much that they actually, one of the hybrids that they had was called a Brewster's warbler, and people in the 1800s, the ornithologists, they actually thought it was a different species. So there's two kind of hybrids that come out. One is the Brewster's, and then if a Brewster's mates with one of the other two, the golden wing or the blue wing, you actually get a Lawrence's hybrid, which is even rarer. So it's just something to be looking for. You can find them, even though hybrids are kind of rare. So that's the golden wing warbler. The next two we're going to look at are a little bit drab. This is the Tennessee warbler. The spring males have the white eyebrow stripe and a gray head contrasting with a green back. Their peaks are May 16th and September 9th. They're a very common migrant that come through here. On their breeding grounds, they specialize in eating spruce budworms up in the Canadian pine forests. In fact, their populations are cyclic by the abundance of the spudworms. When there are a lot of them, we get more Tennessee warblers, and when there's less of them, we get less Tennessee warblers. So most of their food source is eating on those spruce budworms. In their wintering grounds in Central and South America, they're called the coffee tree warbler because they've actually adapted to living in the coffee tree areas. So their main habitat was destroyed by the coffee tree plantations, but they've adapted to it. So they're often seen in the coffee tree plantations in Central and South America. And the population has actually kind of increased. In fact, Audubon's only seen a few of them, and Alexander Wilson, who's the father of ornithology in the early 1800s and who named a lot of these birds and who I'll talk about later, probably only saw a couple of them. So the population has increased. It has a unique song. It's kind of a staccato, three-parted, loud, three-note song. And they seem to have an affinity for blossoms. So if you have your tree is blossoming, your crabapple or your magnolia or all these trees that are blossoming now here in the spring, a lot of times you'll see them up there feeding in the blossoms, feeding on insects that are in the blossoms. So again, learning songs helped identify a lot of these birds. So the next one we're going to look at too is a little bit kind of drab too. It's called the orange crown warbler. You rarely see the orange crown. Once in a while, it'll display it to a female. It's kind of a dingy olive green warbler with no wing bars and kind of faint breast streaks that you can sometimes make out. It's a late fall migrant here. It usually comes like in October when the other birds have kind of already come through. Orange crowns are much more common out west, and they actually winter in our Gulf states. So they don't go that far south. They don't go to Central and South America like the other ones do. They have quite a large breeding range in Canada. Again, much more common out west. In fact, there's like 4 subspecies. Only one of them are here. The other 3 are out west. And its song is kind of like a faint trill. So it's the orange crown warbler. In the fall, they tend to like, you see them in goldenrods. They tend to like to feed in goldenrods. So it's kind of a place to look for them in the fall. The next bird is our Nashville warbler. It's a combination of the gray head, the yellow throat, and the bold white eye ring that helps separate this bird. Its peak times are May 10th and September 18th, and it's a pretty common migrant. Alexander Wilson named this bird when he first saw it. It's kind of poorly named because he saw it in the Cumberland Valleys. When he came out of the Cumberland Valleys, he went into Nashville and got his first specimen there. Some interesting facts about Nashville warblers are they sometimes use porcupine needles in their nest. It helps deter snakes and that from trying to crawl into the nest. It doesn't nest that far away from us, actually, and kind of makes it down into central and even southern parts of Michigan. So they don't nest that far from us. They're another bird that in the fall tends to like to, you see them in goldenrod fields, sometimes feeding in there. And they tend to kind of like the open woodlands. And usually when they might get through, they're usually kind of in the middle range. So they're usually not at treetops too much or off very much on the ground. There's 2 separate populations. We have the eastern one here, but there's also one that's in the mountains of the Pacific Northwest. And they're probably going to end up separating those someday because there's about 1,000-mile separation between their ranges. So it's just kind of an interesting bird that could be made into 2 species pretty soon. Our next bird, the northern parula. What a pretty bird. Parulas have the bluish warblers with a yellow throat and breast, with a dark band across the breast, which is washed with red. So you can kind of see that dark band there. Alexander named this bird also. It has an interesting breeding range. It's actually split into 2 populations, one north of us and one south of us. One of the nesting requirements is they nest in moss. So south of us, they nest in Spanish moss, and north of us, they nest in Urcea moss, which is a lichen. We don't have either one of those here, so they're really rare nesters here. We have summer wreckers. There are a few nesting wreckers, but if you want to go to the breeding grounds, you either have to go up into Michigan or you have to go to southern Indiana and basically all the way down to the Gulf Coast. But there's kind of an area where they don't breed, and we are in it because we don't really have moss species that are growing here. So this is the northern parula. One thing I wanted to say is that the warblers they all nest migrate at night. So they're pretty active during the day, especially in the morning, because they need to reload, they need to feed. So all these warblers migrate at night, which is kind of a detriment because some of them, obviously, this is where they hit the buildings and they hit the transformers and they hit the towers. So they just haven't adapted to the fact that we've sent, man-made structures up that high. So it takes a toll on them every spring and every fall. So that is the northern parula. The yellow warbler, everybody knows this one. One of our most common warblers, probably our second most common warbler. Our most extensive warbler with yellow on it has that kind of a dark eye, and the male has some rusty streaks on it in the spring. Its peak total from when the breeding birds and the migrants are coming through is like May 17th, and in the fall, it's August 17th. And again, it's an abundant resident and migrant. It's kind of interesting that they're actually an early fall migrant. Late July, I could be up on the U.S. Steel breakwall down there at Miller Beach. And so here comes some warblers flying in from Canada. They're yellow warblers that have already nested up in Canada, and they're coming back. So sometimes I can get like a handful of them just flying off the lake and landing either on the beach or on the breakwall right near me. So it's kind of interesting. And then I can turn around and look to the woods behind me and still see the summer residents back there feeding their young. So they kind of intermingle back there. These birds coming literally over 1,000 miles, and they're all done nesting and they're migrating south. And still the ones behind me, the ones that are here in Dunes-Cal are still basically feeding their young. So it's kind of interesting with that. They're heavily parasitized by cowbirds. What they'll do is if they catch it early enough, they'll make another layer of a nest and lay eggs over the top of it. But sometimes those cowbirds are pesky and they keep coming back. And so I have quite an antiquated bird book collection, even some back to the 1800s. And it shows some of these pictures of where some of these warblers have 6 layers of where they laid their eggs and the cowbirds came in. So there's 6 layers to the nest before finally either they gave up and let the cowbirds hatch, or they basically defeated the cowbird and were able to raise their young. Cowbirds, that usually they hatch first. They have a much shorter gestation time, and so they're bigger. So they demand all the food in the nest, and also if they're big enough, they'll actually push the others, like yellow warblers and other warblers, out of the nest, so they get the nest to themselves. So, but they're probably the most, them and song sparrows are probably the most ones that are parasitized by the cowbirds. And so again, they're abundant and they tend to be near water areas. They kind of like willow and alder areas, but it's pretty hard to, they're pretty hard to miss them in the spring, and the males are pretty vocal and pretty conspicuous when they come out. So this is the yellow warbler. There's another picture of the yellow warbler, male with some streaks on it. This one is the chestnut-sided warbler, and believe it or not, they're really closely related to yellow warblers. Some of the DNA basically has them roughly 95 to 96% the same DNA that the yellow warblers have, even though they look completely different. It's identified by its combination of the yellow crown and the chestnut sides, which is going to separate it from all the other warblers. They peak around May 18th and come through in the fall. They peak around September 13th. They're an uncommon resident here, but they do nest here, but a very common migrant when they come through. They like the second growth forest when they do nest here. And we are at the south end of their breeding range. Like I said before, a lot of warblers reach their limits here, and this is at the kind of near the south end of their breeding range. So most of them nest to the north of us, which is why they're such a common migrant. They've actually increased with the cutting of the forests because they like those second year forests to nest in. They're rare, kind of rare to uncommon breeders. The state park usually always has a few. LaSalle usually has a few. Kankakee Fish and Wildlife always has a few. I'm sure there's probably a few over in Beverly Shores. Last summer, though, I was pretty lucky. An area that I bird a lot, which is Marquette Park in Gary. There's a trail that you can take. And there was a pair that were nesting there actually. So it's kind of fun to see them. In fact, I got a picture of them. When I'd hike the trail, he'd come out and greet me. Wasn't very happy, and I never left the trail, but he just was basically telling me, don't get any closer because I have a nest back here. So he would give me that kind of evil eye thing and just stare at me, and I would just keep walking. But again, I never left the trail, but he basically set the demarcation line as the trail. So there is a chestnut-sided warbler. Again, the yellow cap and the chestnut side. The magnolia warbler, beautiful warbler. It's a black and yellow warbler. Its underparts are dark with large white wing patches. And the yellow underneath has these bold stripes on it, which I'll show on the next picture. Its peaks here around May 18th. And in the fall, it comes peaks around September 13th. It's a very uncommon resident. We get a few summer records, but it's a very common migrant. Again, we're kind of near the southern edge of their breeding range, so we get quite a few migrants coming through. And again, they've kind of increased with the clearing of forests. They also like those second growth forests to nest in. It was named by Alexander Wilson, who's kind of the father of American ornithology. He was a mentor to Audubon and Ord and Nuttall and a lot of those guys who came along later in the 1800s. So he'd go on these expeditions and find new birds, and then catalog them. So this is one that he saw in a magnolia tree in Mississippi. Obviously, these birds that winter in Central and South America, and they nest in Canada and in Michigan and the northern states. So he, unbeknownst to him, basically all he saw was a migrant going through. But at that time, he didn't know that. So he always thought they were permanent residents there. So that's why he would name them after where he found them. So again, he saw his first sighting of this was a magnolia tree in the state of Mississippi. So very common migrant. They tend to feed at low levels and at our level, so it's kind of easy to see when they come through. They're showing the magnolia warbler. I took this at the Hammond Bird Sanctuary in the pine trees there. You can see the bold stripes on the wings and the yellow undersides with the bold streaking of black. So there's a magnolia warbler. Our next warbler is the Cape May warbler. Again, he saw his first one on Cape May, New Jersey. They're probably more common here than they are in New Jersey, but that's what it's named for. Chestnut cheeks and yellow below with black stripes is going to separate that from all the other warblers. They definitely prefer conifer trees, even in migration. I remember as a kid, we had some pine trees behind our house, and in the spring, there'd always be a few Cape May warblers singing up there in migration. An interesting fact about this bird is that they have their tongue is actually somewhat curved, so they're able to collect nectar and sap. And I would often see them, especially on the bird sanctuary, Hammond Bird Sanctuary on the west side. There's some trees there that often give off a lot of sap. And I have pictures of these birds actually lapping up the sap in migration. Much of their diet too is also the spruce budworms because they nest up in Canada, so they're cyclic. When there's a lot of outbreak of the spruce budworms, there's a more Cape Mays, and when there's less of them, there's less Cape Mays. They actually have the largest clutch size of any warbler. They'll lay up to 5 or 6 eggs. And again, depending on the cycle of the budworms, if it's a really good year, all 5 or 6 of them will probably make it. If it's a really bad year, only a few of them will make it. So it's kind of like their way of basically hedging when there's a good year and hedging when there's a bad year. So that's the Cape May warbler. There's another picture of it taken at the Hammond Bird Sanctuary. Again, in migration, you can get these birds anywhere, but like I said, they do have an affinity for pine trees. So you check the pine trees when you go out on your bird hikes, and chances are you might get a Cape May warbler there. Our next bird is the black-throated blue, well named. Its upper part has that midnight blue color, and its throats and partial on the sides is black with a white belly. It peaks around May 16th, and in the fall, it's September 16th. It's a fairly common migrant, especially in the fall. It seems like we always get more in the fall. And part of that reason is in the fall, some of them will go down the Atlantic coast. In the spring, most of them tend to come up the Mississippi flyway and come through here. They nest in the UP and in southern Canada. A very interesting fact about them is the fact that the female of the bird looks completely different. In fact, up until like about the mid 1800s, they actually thought they were different species. So this is the black-throated blue male, obviously pretty easy to tell apart. There's another picture of the black-throated blue. Again, a good thing about them is they tend to migrate kind of around eye level, a little higher, a little lower. So they're not in some scrubs on the ground or way up in the tree where they're hard to see. So they're usually at our level. So again, what I told you about the female looks completely different. Here's a female. Took it at the bird sanctuary. Again, some of the older books that I have actually describe them as a different species. It wasn't until later that they realized that they were male and female. So females are dark bird, and you can always tell because they have that white patch, kind of a handkerchief on the primaries. You can see kind of in the middle there, there's a dark patch there. You can see it probably better there. That white patch helps separate it and there's also a little bit of an eye ring around it too. So that's the female black-throated blue. Again, they're coming through now. Their peaks are around May 16th and September 17th. So it's just kind of interesting that they have a completely different look from the males and the females. The yellow-rumped warbler. We have the myrtle subspecies here. They have the conspicuous yellow rump, which I'll show in a second. They're blue-gray above with a heavy black breast patch and yellow crown and yellow on the bend of the wing. Again, a white throat. It's going to separate it from the subspecies that used to be a different species, but they lumped them together in like 1973. I'm sorry, went the wrong way. They're showing the yellow rump. It's nicknamed for some people is called the butterbutt because of the yellow rump. Yellow rumps have the most northern winter range of any warbler. And the reason why that is because they're able to digest the wax coating on berries. So we actually get a few here in the winter. You need to kind of find berry areas. We're definitely at the north end of their wintering range, but it's kind of funny to think that we can get birds here in the wintertime. And I usually find a few every winter, but I tend to be out a lot. But again, so they can eat the berries. So they can eat, you look for them, they eat cedar berries, myrtle berries, bayberries, honeysuckle, and poison ivy berries. So that's the reason why the birds can stick through our tough winters. They're kind of the harbinger of spring for warblers. They're usually our first ones to come. April 29th is actually their peak. So we're actually kind of almost past the peak already. And October 3rd is their peak in the fall. And they're usually one of the last ones to go. So in fact, usually when I see the first ones in the spring, I get a little excited because it's the start of spring migration for the warblers, which is going to last for the next 7 to 8 wings. So this is the yellow rump myrtle warbler. They used to be a separate species called the Audubon, and that's the western form of it. I think in my 40 plus years of singing, I probably birding, I've seen probably maybe a half a dozen Audubons here. And again, basically the same plumage, only a yellow throat. And about 5 years ago, I had one at the bird sanctuary, and but it got in the tangles, and I really couldn't get a picture of it, but got nice looks at it. So it's just something to go through when you see all these. It's such an abundant bird, especially like now in early May and late April, that it's kind of fun just to go through all of them and just keep looking for that yellow throat on those yellow rump warblers. So you never get tired of doing that, and hopefully maybe someday you'll be able to see one. So that's the yellow rumped warbler. Again, an abundant bird across the whole continent, basically. Abundant migrant, and again, we'll get a few winter records here. Next bird is the black-throated green warbler. Kind of an interesting bird. It has that bright yellow face framed by a black throat and an olive greenish crown. This is kind of taken in the fall, so the crown is kind of fading a little bit. It peaks around May 13th, and the fall peak is around September 19th. It's a rare nester here. The best place to find them in breeding season, I think, is the state park. I know there's probably a few at Beverly Shores. I know there's a few down at Kankakee Fish and Wildlife area. We are at the southern edge of their breeding range. So, and they're actually expanding south. So I think they're becoming more and more common. In fact, in the 1980s, when I would hike Trail 10 at the state park, might find 1 or 2 maybe nests. And now if you do 10 and 2, you're liable to find, 4 or 5 nests there. So I think they are expanding down in our area now. They're a forest woodland bird, so you usually see them up in the forest. Most of the time up in the treetops, except for in migration. Again, you can get birds anywhere. Their call is kind of a buzzy zuzu Z call, which kind of gives them away in the summer, and you can kind of helps to find them. So they're a rare nester around here, and so it's kind of a fun bird to try to find in the summertime. So it's a black-throated green warbler, very common in migration as they come through. It's another picture of it showing the black throat, well named. Blackburnian, just an absolutely splendid bird. A striking bird, really. It's black and white with a bright orange throat, which that orange throat is going to separate it from all the other warblers. It peaks around May 17th, so it kind of peaks in the middle of the month, so it's still coming. And it usually peaks in the fall around September 3rd. It's a fairly common migrant. There are a few summer records. State Park, I know, has had a few. I think there's a few other ones that have been around. It's more common in the spring than it is in the fall. And I'll explain that down the road of why that kind of happens. But birds are actually fairly close nesting here. They nest into like central and even into southern Michigan along the lake. So with a few summer records there, I'm sure there's some breeding records here. But that would be a rare breeder here. Again, they have a fondness for forests with tall trees. They tend to be especially tall pine trees. So a lot of times that's how you'll see them migrating through, is in pine trees. Again, you can get any warbler anywhere, but if you hike an area with pine trees, they'll have their a large number of the blackburnians coming through. Just a striking bird in appearance, and it's always a treat to kind of see one. The next bird is the yellow-throated warbler. It's another bird that reaches the northern limit of its range here. In fact, most of them you have to go to central Indiana to kind of get into their range. It's a grayback warbler with a yellow throat, a black eye mask extending down its side, and 2 white wing bars. A lot of times if you have ID problems IDing warblers, the first thing you want to look for are wing bars. If they have them, that's going to separate it about half the warblers. If they don't have it, that's going to go into the other half of warblers. So if you have trouble finding them, you want to check for wing bars, because that's going to basically limit you down, get you down to 50% of the warblers. Yellow throats, they can tend to creep. So they creep around the branches. The nickname is sycamore warblers. Even around here, if you could find some places with sycamore, I think the Heron Rookery, Deep River, and there's some places down at Kankakee Fish and Wildlife on 10 Mile Road that have sycamores. They tend to breed there. If they're not there, they like to breed in tall pine trees. But like when you go downstate central Indiana, usually find the sycamore forest. This bird's more common down there. So again, it's a southern warbler that reaches its breeding range here. Our next bird is the pine warbler, and this is a very well-named bird. It's a bright yellow bird. It's yellow-breasted with 2 white wing bars and a black unstreaked bottom, but it has some dull streaks on the side. It's most of the pine warblers, it kind of has another one of those funny ranges. They don't really breed here. Most of them breed either east, a little bit north, or southeast of here. But The ones that breed around here are on Lake Michigan. They're a really rare breeder. They have an affinity for pine trees. They nest in pine trees. They eat the seeds. Their bills are made for prying open the pines so they can eat the seeds. I actually had one in the winter time, so obviously, but it's a bird that winters in the southeast, so it doesn't winter that far away. And it's a very early spring migrant here. In fact, it peaks around April 28th, and in the fall, it's September 12th. Its song is helpful. It's kind of a trill on one pitch, almost kind of sounds like a chipping sparrow. And again, they're migrating through now. I was at the bird sanctuary last weekend. I had 7 of them around me, trilling all at the same time. Obviously, that was the peak for that bird, but there's such a loud trill that it was kind of literally had my head on a swivel watching the pine warblers coming through. So this is the pine warbler again. There was a pair that nested over at the state park up by the Green Tower. And I've heard of a few other nests too. But so they tend to like the pine areas in up along the lakefront if they're going to nest around these parts, but very rare nester here. Next bird is the prairie warbler. The 2 black face marks are going to help separate it. One kind of goes through the eye. It has yellow underparts that are striped, which I'll show in the next picture, but it also has this little chestnut patch on the back. So that's going to help separate it. They peak here May 19th and September 1st is their fall peak. They're a very rare resident and migrant. In fact, we have a few relic populations here up along Lake Michigan, in Michigan and in Indiana, and I think in Illinois. Otherwise, you have to go way south into central Indiana to get into their breeding range. So it's kind of interesting that they're not, we could get some overshoots here in migration, but they're very rare on migration. It's always a treat to see one in migration. And again, there's only a few selected areas where they breed. The blowout areas in the dunes is one of them where that relic population is. I'll tell a quick story. One time I was hiking in my younger days when I was hiking Trail 10, and I decided to go up one of the blowout trails to get up so I can get a good vista of Lake Michigan and eat my lunch. So I went up this blowout trail. It's quite, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 feet going up the sand trail and get out and get a nice view of Lake Michigan. And I decided I was going to get under a pine tree to get out of the sun. And I sat under the pine tree, and next thing I know, there's this young, small little bird basically scolding me and jumping around me within arm's length. And I realized that I was sitting underneath its nesting tree. So the discretion being the better part of honor, I got up and moved, and about 30, 40 foot away to another pine tree. And sure enough, that bird was going in and out. Birds are going in and out, feeding their young. So it's kind of my prairie warbler story. And it was kind of a treat because they're so rare up here to be able to actually really be near the nest. You know, prairie warbler is a really poor name for it again. It's really a bird of kind of scrublands and over abandoned fields and open wetlands. Open woodlands. And they tend to nest in loose colonies. So it's just kind of interesting to talk about the prairie warblers. We'll go on to the next. Here's my next picture. There's a picture of the prairie warbler as it sits, and I took this over. Let's see, I think it was over by Kemmel Road with that little population that's over there. So it's kind of interesting to have that. The palm warbler. One of our most common migrants. They peak around May 6th, and their fall peak is September 26th, so it's kind of a late migrant. You ID this bird by the brown on the top. The underparts are yellowish, kind of with throat breeding into a white belly. We have the Western race. There are 2 races of it. The Eastern race is going to have yellow all the way down the belly. We don't really get those here. That's an East Coast bird. I think someday they may separate those species because there is some gap in the ranges. It also has a chestnut cap, which kind of fades a little bit in the fall. Palm warblers are ground-loving species. You almost always find them on the ground. And they also, one of the characteristics of them is they bob their tail. So when they bob their tail, you can almost see the yellow undertail coverts there. Again, they're always on the, nearly always on the ground. And a quick story about that, when I used to teach courses like at whatever, Gibson Woods or the state park or over in Illinois, I always used to rail about palm warblers and how poorly named they are, because what are the odds you're going to see a palm warbler in a palm tree? I mean, the better name for them would be bog warblers, because they nest in bogs in Canada. And so I always thought, boy, they should have changed the name. Obviously, Wilson, who was down in Florida, saw this bird in Florida. So I used to rail about that, saying what a poor name it was. And then, about 4 or 5 years ago, we went down to Central Florida on a vacation, and there were palm warblers everywhere, in palm trees, in the backyards. It's the heart of their wintering grounds. So now I've kind of backed off that, realizing that if he went down there and saw what I saw, I could see why you'd name it the palm warbler. Again, I would like to call it the bog warbler, but palm warbler it is. And like I said, on their wintering grounds, they're quite common, especially in Florida. There's another palm warbler. So it's kind of funny, because I used to go through all these warblers, and I used to kind of say to myself, well, if the birding gods ever came down and gave me absolute power to change bird names, I'm going to the wood warblers first. Some of these birds are named after states that they're not really common there. It's just where they were first seen, or after states where they're first seen. It has nothing to do with, their range or their appearance. But lucky for everybody, I don't have that absolute power. So their names are safe, and then we will stick with those. So there's another picture of the palm warbler. Quite common, very common migrant coming through right now. Again, they bob their tails and they're on the ground. They're showing the yellow undertail coverts of a palm warbler. Oh, yet another picture of the palm warbler, showing the cap and the palm warbler. Bay-breasted warbler, our next warbler. Bay-breasted are dark-looking birds with chestnut throats and sides. Also look for that buffy patch on their neck. They peak around May 17th, and so we still have time to get them, and September 13th in the fall. They nest in Canada. Again, one of those birds that cycle with the populations of the spruce budworms. So they nest in the boreal spruce forests of Canada. And they're actually a close relative of the blackpoll warbler, which I'll discuss here next. A few birds can be confused with blackpoll warblers in the fall. We'll look at them. Bay-breasteds are kind of a pretty bird that when they come through. There's another picture of a bay-breasted showing the bay and showing that patch on its side. Again, so we're still near peak, which is like around May 17th. I was, always like seeing bay-breasted. They're a pretty abundant migrant, especially in the fall. The blackpoll warbler, again, closely related to the bay-breasted. It's going to have that black head crown or poll. Poll in one of the European languages means head, which is why they're called black polls. Red polls are the same way. They have red on the head, but they also have the black poll, the black head, and the white cheek patches that are going to help separate it. Their migration periods are actually kind of late. It's May 19th and September 13th in the fall. You can kind of see those black streaks on the side. It's one of our most common fall migrants. They nest in Canada, far up into Canada, actually all the way up into the tree line. They're usually seen in migration at mid or to upper levels. They also have this really high-pitched soft call. In fact, some of my elderly birding friends say that the pitch is so high now that they can't even hear it anymore. So it's very difficult to hear, but it's kind of amusing coming from its bird. Again, warblers with their bird calls, they really don't warble. They have all these other different sounds that sound like insects or these modulated calls. So I'm not really sure whether they're ever called warblers, because they don't really make a warbling call. They have all these other little calls that they do. So anyway, back to the blackpoll. In the fall, when they come through, this, a lot of birds kind of look similar, and they kind of, washed out versions of themselves, but not this one. This one looks like this in the fall. Looks completely different than it does in the spring. Again, there's a spring bird and there's the fall bird. And so, let me go back to the spring because that's what we're going to talk about. Spring birds are coming through, and they're abundant migrants now. So they're closely related to bay-breasted. And so in the fall, it could be a little bit difficult to tell them apart. What you want to look for because they look so much alike, it could be a little confusing. The blackpoll is going to have streak on its back and yellow feet, where the bay-breasteds are going to have dark legs and no streaks on the back. Again, if they're up high, it's going to be a little hard to tell. And the bay-breasted sometimes keep a little bay on the sides. But if you're confused, there's a name for that if you don't know, if you can't get it to species, and they're called bay-polls. So sometimes we go back to just calling them bay-polls. We can't really separate them. So anyway, there it is in the fall. Look at this one, the cerulean warbler. Sky blue above, white below, with narrow black bar across the breast, which I'll show you right there. You can see that blue. Ceruleans are definitely a treetop warbler. They peak around May 19th, and they're out of here. Their peak in the fall is August 21st, so they're one of the first ones to leave. They're definitely a treetop warbler. They're federally endangered, so their population is plummeting. In fact, since the 1970s, they're down about 80%. So they're on the endangered species list. They nest in loose colonies in the very tops of trees. In fact, there's a term for a malady that you get by looking at cerulean warblers, and it's called warbler neck, because you're looking up at these birds so tall in the trees that your neck starts getting stiff. When you lift your binoculars up and you're holding your arms up, you can actually get a stiff neck. So the term for that is actually called warbler neck. Again, it nests in the very tops of trees. I was just lucky one day in the state park. It was really, really cold in this day in mid-May, and some birds were coming down to the ground. You rarely see these birds in the ground. You usually see them way up in the tops of the trees. In fact, if it wasn't for the fact that they were like incessant singers, and with their call, you would never be able to find them. It'd literally be almost impossible to see them in the tops of trees. You wouldn't even know where to look. But because they are incessant singers, you're able to find them in the tops of trees, even though it's not really easy to do that. So the place to find these endangered birds, probably the best place to find them, is in the state park. Down around Wilson Shelter, there's always a few. If you hike down Trail 10, down by Trail 2, you can often get these birds. There's usually some pairs down there. I'm sure there's probably some others around. I know Kankakee Fish and Wildlife has a few. When I go down there, that 10-mile road will often have some birds there too. But near Wilson Shelter, around Wilson Shelter is probably the best place to find this bird. Again, they like forests. In fact, one of the reasons they're decreasing is the fragmenting of forests. We're putting roads through and whatever transmission tower paths through or whatever, and fragmenting our forests. And unfortunately, it's enabling cowbirds to kind of go into areas where they weren't going before, including the edges of forests. So cerulean warblers are basically defenseless against them. And unlike the yellow warbler, which will keep laying eggs over the top of it, cerulean warblers won't do that. So that's kind of one of the reasons why cerulean warblers are on the decline. Again, beautiful male cerulean warbler. Black and white warblers, well named. Black and white striped body with black stripes on the side and white stripes on the back. It's kind of a two-tone black and white bird. Its peak is usually around May 11th, and in the fall it's September 11th. It's a very common migrant here and a rare nester. There's a few nests. We're in the heart of their area, but they're just not a very common nester here. I found more nests down around the Kankakee River than I found up here and up along the lakefront, but there's always a few around. In some of my older books, they actually weren't even called the black and white warbler. They were called the black and white creeper, which is what they do. They basically creep a lot. So it's just a niche that they found that they can creep around, so they can get into areas that the other warblers can't get to by being able to creep. You can kind of see almost on this picture, it has a longer hind toe, kind of like brown creepers do. So they're able to hitch up on the sides of tree trunks. But unlike creepers that basically go up and attaches to go down, black and white creepers can creep all over. So they can be going up, they can be going down, they can be on the trunks, they can be on the edge of branches. Again, when they do nest here, though, they kind of like those second growth forests, and not the mature forest so much. So that's the black and white warbler or creeper. There's another picture of it. There's a male bird, a little darker, black and white, pretty easy to tell, pretty distinctive. American redstart. Okay, this is an interesting bird. It's an abundant migrant here, one of our most common migrants. It has that black body with an orange patch on the wing and on the tail. They have we're in the heart of their quite extensive eastern breeding range, and pretty much east of the Mississippi is their breeding range, which is why they're so common. Again, they like second growth forests too. State park. One time I walked a trail on LaSalle along the Kankakee River and counted like probably about 9 or 10 nests for the couple miles that I walked. So they're very common breeders here in certain areas, abundant migrants. One interesting characteristic about them is it takes 2 years to get to this plumage. Here's another picture of that redstart, just kind of a gorgeous black head, and there's the orange patches on it. Okay, it takes 2 years for them to get to breeding plumage. First year males look like females. So they look pretty close to females. In fact, most of them, we just call them IMF redstarts, immature male, female redstarts, because it's kind of hard to tell them apart. One of the ways you can kind of tell them apart, if that's what you want to do, is the males, first year males tend to have more orange on them, as you can see here. Females tend to have more yellow on the wing pits and on the undertail coverts. Another way to tell them apart is the second year males will sing. So if you see a female type bird that's singing, what you have there is a first year male redstart. But most of the time, because they're way up in trees, they're a little difficult. We just call them IMF redstarts. Prothonotary warbler, the golden warbler. Entire head and breast are deep yellow and orange. So some are a little bit more oranger than others. They have that black eye, and wings are blue-gray with no bars. Again, usually found in swamps or at the edges of rivers, river edges. One of the characteristics of them is they nest in cavities. Only 2 warblers do that: Prothonotary and the southwestern Lucy's warbler, which we don't have here. Prothonotaries are named. The name Prothonotaries actually was named after the Catholic English robes of England. They said they look very much like that, so that's why they called them Prothonotaries. They're rare and uncommon kind of migrants. I mean, we get a few here, but again, this is one of those southern warblers that we are kind of near the northern edge of their breeding range. Again, found in wooded swamps, but the best place to find these, well, is Kankakee River. And I took a kayak trip down the Little Calumet River through Gary, and there's like half a dozen of them. But by far the best place to see them, and I think a lot of the people here know that, is Dunes State Park at Wilson Shelter. Because they nest in cavities, they have a nest box there. So it's pretty easy to just kind of park in the lot there, walk over to the boardwalk and look out and check the nest box that's there. There's always been kind of a next box there since I've been going there since the late 70s. There was usually one that was down in the corner, nothing near the setup that they have now. It's much better. And once in a while they would get taken over by wrens, but the way this one's set up, I doubt that's ever going to happen. So if you want to see a prothonotary warbler like that, you want to go to the Wilson shelter. Again, there's some that nest further down if you're walking the trail. They have kind of a loud call, but just an absolutely golden, gorgeous bird. So that's the prothonotary warbler. Worm-eating warbler, that's another kind of interesting bird. I took this picture in the state park. Basically, their range is much further, like central Indiana to the south. From what I understand, they're not even really common there until you get even further into southern Indiana. It's kind of one of those skulkers that are difficult to see, so they're on the ground, but one of the characteristics is they walk, they don't hop. So ID tips are, it has an olive brown above with a buffy colored below. Basically a black patch that kind of goes from the eye to the back. It's poorly named, worm-eating warbler. They actually don't eat worms. They actually eat spiders and lots of caterpillars. That's their favorite food source. Another characteristic of it is they tend to nest in heavy ravines. Most of the birds we get here, which is somewhat kind of uncommon to rare, are just overshoots. But for 3 years, there's been a pair that's been nesting on Trail 8 at the dunes. And it's kind of apropos because if you take Trail 8, there's a lot of ravines, it's very hilly, and that's what these birds like. If you go to find them down in Kentucky and that, you usually find them in heavily wooded areas with ravines in it. So that's where they like to nest in, is birds with ravines. And one last characteristic is that they tend to not want to flesh off the nest. So females will basically sit on the nest, hoping that camouflage keeps them from being detected. So you could literally go right up to them, which is not a wise thing to do, and they won't flesh off the nest. More often heard than saying, it's one of those birds, and their call is kind of a dry trill. Again, almost somewhat chipping sparrow-like. Next bird is the ovenbird. Oh, I'm sorry, there's another picture of the worm-eating, kind of a better picture of it, showing the eye stripe and the little buff on the breast. Again, don't eat worms, they eat caterpillars. Now, there we go, ovenbird. It's a common migrant here. It's kind of an uncommon nester, although they're a little bit more common in the appropriate habitat. They look kind of like a small thrush, brown back, stripe below with spots, and has like an orange crown with a stripe on it, and kind of pinkish legs. They're another bird that walks, so it doesn't hop, so you can kind of separate it that way. They're definitely a ground bird. You almost always see them on the ground. You rarely see them up in the trees, and they're a forest bird. We happen to be in the heart of their range, so there's if you get it, state park's a really good place to see them. They used to be much more common there. I used to do Trail 10 and 2, and you could get 6 or 8 pairs easy just by walking that. Now you might get half of that by doing that. Often given away by their loud call. It's very loud. It's teacher, teacher, teacher. Sometimes, again, you can detect it if it's out in the forest by listening for the teacher, teacher, teacher call. It's called an ovenbird because of its nest. It kind of looks like a Dutch oven laid on its side. So it has this large entryway, like a tunnel that leads into a chamber. So if you can picture a Dutch oven standing up and leaning on its side, that's what their nests look like. And again, they're ground nesters. So that is the ovenbird. Next bird we want to look at, the water thrushes. Again, kind of looks a little bit like a thrush. It's brown. There's 2 water thrushes that we have. One of them is kind of rare, and this one's actually very common in migration, the northern water thrush. And the way you separate them it's brown back, but it has kind of a creamy or pale yellowish eye stripe. And underparts are striped with yellow wash. But the way you're going to separate it from the next bird is it's going to have a white throat. There's not going to be I'm sorry, it's going to have streaks on its throat, not a white throat like the next one. So it's going to have streaks on its throat. You kind of see the little bit of the streaks on it, a little bit of the yellow wash on its eye stripe. So it's called the northern water thrush. It peaks here in about May 21st and October 1st. And again, it's one of those birds that walk, they don't hop. They're often seen at the edge of the water's edge. So it's a ground warbler. It breeds in the boreal forest north of here. So again, it's usually found around water. So there's the water thrush. The other bird that I was just talking about, the Louisiana, you can see the white throat. It's a bird that, one of those birds that barely reach their northern limit here. Most of them are further south of here. Again, it walks. It doesn't hop. Louisiana water thrushes, basically similar to the northern water thrush, except for it has the white throat, and also the songs are different, so you can learn the songs. It's a bird of the southeast, again, that makes it here. The best place to try to find this bird used to be Trail 2 at the state park. I would always get a few pairs there. We really don't do that much Trail 2 anymore. But it was probably the best place to catch it. They're kind of habitat restrictive, so they kind of like creeks and brooks, but with not a whole lot of vegetation on the banks. So, Trail 2 is kind of good for that. So it's kind of a forest bird. So there's very little understory, and they tend to nest along the creeks with that have little vegetation on the sides. Again, a loud singer, quite a loud singer. And again, there's other parts in the state park that have it too, but I found that Trail 2 is probably the best place to try to look for this bird. So that is the Kentucky warbler. Louisiana. Now we go to the Kentucky warbler. Another one of those birds that barely make it here from the south. So we're at their northern limit here. They like a lot of understory. You usually get a pair over at Stony Run in Lake County. Again, I'm giving a lot of spots here, but again, there are other spots too. And maybe you have your own favorite spots for some of these birds, but I'm just telling you where I try to go for them. So Kentucky usually has a few down in Stony Run in southern Lake County. Also, there's some along the Kankakee River, like LaSalle, Kankakee Fish and Wildlife Area, Kankakee Marsh. If you hike the rivers, some of those back areas, you can get Kentucky warblers. Fremont Road had some, up that far north there. I used to kind of get them on Trail 2, but it's been a long time since I've seen any on Trail 2. So at the state park. So Kentucky warblers, the ID tips are they have that broad black sideburns extending down from the eye and kind of yellow spectacles around the eye. And a southern warbler that's rarely seen here in migration on the lakefront. So it's the Kentucky warbler. It peaks around May 17th and it's out of here. It's usually peaks by August 20th as it peak in the fall. There's another picture of it kind of showing those sideburns a little bit. There's an ovenbird that somehow got out of sequence. You can see it singing. Next bird is a Connecticut warbler, a very difficult bird to find and see. It's one of those skulkers that tend to be in the brush and they're heard more than seen. They have a yellowish body and undersides that are yellowish. They have this bold, complete eye ring that's going to separate it from the next bird. So you can look at the eye ring, and they have a gray hood that's plain. It's just a gray hood that goes all the way around that's going to help separate it. Out of the 35 birds that come through here, this was the last one that I was able to photograph. It's not a very good photograph. I'm going to work on that. It's just a very tough bird to see. Probably the best place, maybe one of the best places in the whole state of Indiana is the Hammond Lakefront Park in the fall. It's kind of a smaller area and they always have a few candidates coming through. It's rarely seen in tall trees. I don't think I've ever seen one over 10 feet ever in 40 years of birding. So it's always at below that level and almost always seen on the ground. And one ID tip that helps too is they walk. So sometimes you can see these birds in the brush and you can see them walking, and that kind of gets you excited that it might be a Connecticut warbler, but it's really rare, really tough to see. They're They're rarely studied because up in the bogs where they nest, they're skulkers and they just don't rarely come out in the open. So they like dense cover. So this is the Connecticut warbler seen in Connecticut. We get more Connecticut warblers here than they do probably in Connecticut. Maybe not in the fall, but definitely in the spring. So again, Alexander Wilson saw this first bird that he saw was in Connecticut. Oh, I probably should go away. So this is another skulker, really tough to see, really kind of tough to get good pictures of. This is called the mourning warbler. It's kind of an olive back bird with yellow below, gray hood, but see that black patch at the bottom of the gray hood, which is going to separate it from the Connecticut warbler. Also, the Connecticut warbler has this bold eye ring. Mourning warblers do not. They hop and they don't walk. So again, Connecticut warblers hop. Mourning warblers hop and Connecticut warblers walk. So that can kind of separate them too if they're in the tangles a little bit. They don't breed too far north of here, like south to central Michigan and Wisconsin and up into southern Canada. Usually found in heavy cover and migration, one of the tougher ones to see, almost always on or near the ground. Females kind of have an interesting thing that they do is if you get near their nest, they kind of do the broken wing act. So they'll jump off the nest. And although they don't nest here, like I said, not too far north in Michigan and Canada, they jump off the nest and kind of do the killdeer type thing where they act like they have a broken ring, again, trying to distract you from their nest. So it's kind of interesting to adaptation that they have. So that's the mourning warbler. And I actually took this picture in my backyard. I heard a male singing back there, walked back there with my camera and got him. Here's another picture of the mourning warbler. Again, a little bit difficult to photograph him, but this was a lucky day for me to get a picture of a mourning warbler. This one is not difficult to photograph. This one is not difficult to see. It's probably the most abundant warbler that we have here, not only in the Dunes-Calumet area, but pretty much in the country. And this is the common yellowthroat, easily our most abundant warbler. It has that distinctive face mask and a yellow throat. It's very wren-like. It kind of creeps around on the ground like a wren. It will scold like a wren. It likes wet areas, including ditches, swamps, and marshes. Abundant in these areas. It's nicknamed the bandit bird for obvious reasons. It's very widespread. In fact, it's probably our most distributed warbler across the whole continent. Very famous song also sings it. Whether it's sitting up on a perch or hidden in the shrubs, it's witchety, witchety, witchety. Very common when you're hiking out anywhere near marshes and swamps. Again, it's an abundant bird, an abundant nester. So it peaks around May 12th, and its peak in the fall, September 23rd, but abundant summer resident when it comes through. Hooded warbler. This is more difficult to find. State Park probably always has a few pairs. Kankakee River area usually has a few pairs. Used to find them on 10 Mile Road down there. A ground bird, again, it's called the hooded warbler. It has a black hood, completely encircles the yellow face, forehead on the males, and is black. And it also has white tail spots when it flies. It's one of those, it's ground warbler that you rarely see up in trees. It often sings from hidden perches, so sometimes you hear it and you just don't see it. On the wintering grounds, it's kind of interesting because the males go to forests and the females go to marshes. So they actually have two separate wintering grounds. I took this picture at the state park and it's probably the best place to find it. So it's kind of a rare nester here and kind of an uncommon migrant. Again, most of the population is south. So we get some coming through and maybe it's some overshoots in order to find the hooded warbler. Wilson's warbler, named after Alexander Wilson. He kind of known as the father of ornithology. He was a mentor to Wilson and Orb and all those birds there. quite the man, quite interesting study. Wilson's warbler, you look at that little patch up on top of its head and that kind of beady eye. They're usually kind of found at our levels. Um, um, a common migrant, very common, especially in the fall. Uh, um, again, named after Alexander Wilson. It's kind of funny because all these birds are named after him. The Wilson's phalarope, the Wilson's storm petrel, the Wilson's sandpiper, or snipe. So Wilson named all these birds after himself, basically. So he categorized Wilson after himself. So that's the Wilson's warbler. There's another picture showing that cap on it. So it's just kind of interesting. Common migrant when it comes through. Canada warbler. We're at the southern edge of their breeding range. There's some summer residents here. Canada warblers are interesting because they, a few of them will nest here. Look at that slate, kind of slate back, gray back, no wing bars. And the necklace, it's called the necklace warbler. Tend to be found in forests, usually not out in the open too much. Again, they kind of breed in Michigan and Canada. Canada warblers have quite a modulated song. If you hear it, it's pretty interesting to hear their songs. So it's the Canada warbler again, yellow breast, and the necklaced warbler. Okay, I'm going to go back here for a second. So that's the 35 warbler species that we have. Those are the ones that you have a really good chance of seeing. I said the +1 at the beginning, and the +1, probably already just given it away, but I used to call it the Holy Grail bird. For probably over 30 years, I was hoping to try to see this bird. Every spring, I would learn its call. Every spring, I would hike Trail 10, hoping that one would show up. I kept, at some point, I thought, well, I'm never going to see one here. And then it was funny. I was at work one time, and I got a phone call from my wife, and she said, "Hey, your Holy Grail bird's been spotted up at the Whiting Park along the wall, which I've hiked at least 100 times." And I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "So who spotted it? Somebody that I don't know of, John Doe or something?" And she said, "No, Ken Brock." Oh, the Dean of Indiana birding. So obviously there's a Kirtland's warbler in Whiting. So now it went from me thinking like a 1% chance of that bird being there to 100% chance of that bird being there. So I told her, she said, "Well, I'll meet you there." Well, when you're at work and you still have like 4 hours to go on your shift, and it goes into what I like to call the space-time continuum, where that clock will just not move. You keep looking at that clock, and it is, in fact, it might be going backwards, violating all the rules. It's not moving. So after a couple of hours, I talked myself into not going. I thought, it's not going to be there. She had a doctor's appointment. We're going to have to get to that doctor's appointment. I'm not going to have much time to look for it. So I called her up and said, "Hey, I'm not going." And my wife said, "Are you kidding me? This is your Holy Grail bird. I'm going. I'm taking your stuff. If you're not there, your stuff's going to be there." So I said, "Okay, I'm going to go. We're going to go. We're not going to see it. And then we're going to go to the doctor's appointment." So I meet her there, and there's all my stuff. And I know some of my friends in Illinois, Illinois birders were there, and they're walking out from the parking lot, shaking their heads. Like, "No, we've been here for like an hour. We couldn't find it. So my wife looks at me and goes, "Well, if it's there, you're going to find it. Let's go." Okay, talk me into it. So again, we have maybe 30 minutes at best, and then we have to leave because we have to get going. So I'm going down that I've done a million times before, trying to take my time, checking out all the birds in there, going through and seeing all the palm warblers and seeing all the other warblers, and probably 10, 12 species of warbler, but no Kirtland's warbler. So it's about 100 yards long, and I get down to right to near the end, and there's some vegetation down there, but not a lot. So I kind of get near there. I'm turning around, getting ready to tell her, "See, it's not here." And then something just catches my eye. It's a bird in the tangles. So I thought, well, this is the last tangles. Let me take a look. And so I get closer and kind of silhouetted, I could see the bird was pumping its tail. Well, that's a good sign because there's really only 3 birds that pump their tail. Palm warblers, the very rare prairie warbler, and this bird. Well, it didn't quite look, kind of didn't seem like it was going to be a palm warbler the way it was wagging its tail. So as I got closer and closer and closer, I see this. There it is, my holy grail bird, the Kirtland's warbler in whiting. So I got a picture of it and another picture of it just to make sure, and yet another picture of it just to make sure. So there's probably less, I'll say less than a dozen records of Kirtland warblers here in Northwest Indiana in the Dunes-Calumet area. A lot more birders out there, so I think there'll be more sightings of them. But yeah, this is the rare Kirtland's warbler. So it's just kind of a fun story and a fun bird. And I learned a couple of lessons there, which we won't get into, but I definitely have to thank my wife for that because she talked me into going after I'd literally talked myself out of it. Because again, the space-time continuum of the clock not wanting to move when you're at work. So, and I promised you at the end that I would give you my Smug Mug site. There it is at the bottom. So you can either, whatever, take a picture of it or just come back to this later if you're interested. Lots of birds. Like I said, Ken Brock once told me that he likes going there, but he packs a lunch. So that's going to give you an idea of how many birds are there. So if you like looking at ducks or you like looking at finches, I have some pretty rare birds on there too. Actually, quite a few rare birds that I've taken in Indiana. I have a lot of work to do on it. I've started putting a lot of females in their own thumbnails, so I'm going to be doing a lot of that too. So with that, a lot of information. So, hopefully, just want to I want to thank you all for joining me tonight, and hopefully you enjoyed your evening with the wood warblers. So with that, I will hand things back over to Kim. And again, thanks again for joining.
Thank you, Michael. Wow, so much good information. I had to start writing things down, like places that I want to check for certain birds, which birds I want to study their calls, some of the good tips that you gave, like the 3 birds that pump their tail. And I did go onto your site. I didn't pack a lunch. I set my timer.
Very good. Very good.
So I have lots more to explore in there. Thank you so much. And we are open for questions. We are getting some thank yous in the chat to you because it was just all good stuff. A lot of good information. And especially since we're just going into the peak season for most of those birds that you mentioned. So I think everybody must be very overwhelmed with the information because I'm not getting very many questions. So, but I am going to stop the screen sharing. And if you'll be able to see the link for your photos if you go back onto our Facebook streaming video, because that will be available for a while for you to go back onto. And I'm just going to share my screen here. It's going to probably go backwards. Just a couple of reminders about the walks this weekend, the volunteer opportunities that we have, and the Woodcock Watch. Check the website to see whether or not you need to register on Eventbrite for these. Remember, members are free, and then if you're not a member, the ones that require a registration, I think it's just a $5 fee. So thank you so much. Oh, I think we got one more chat, or is that okay? Yeah, just again, thanking you for what a great presentation. So thank you so much for joining us and for sticking with us through all 35 plus birds. And that plus bird is a special one. I'm sure it's around here again this year. I'm going to be looking for it. Taking my camera with you with me. And if we're lucky, maybe Gil Patmore will find it and take another picture of it too. So I'm going to stop us on Facebook. And if anybody else has any questions, no, everybody's good. Everybody's just like going home and just going to be studying their warblers, I think.